everyone, and welcome back to another episode of CESA 2's Building Educator Capacity. I am your host, Mitchell Lilly, and I am joined once again by my co-host, Phil Anderson. Hey, Phil.
Hello there. Glad to be here once again.
And we have a continuation of the excellent conversation from last episode between Belinda Swan from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and our consultant, Dr. Valerie Schmitz.
In the last episode, we had a conversation about the hidden dangers that occur from transitioning more into online learning. And in this episode, we'll look at more of the practical solutions to help avoid these dangerous situations.
Music in this episode is by Miss Liz Elliott, band teacher at Whitewater Middle School in Whitewater, Wisconsin. Let's get back into it.
So I love that, and I think I'd like to get into some of the resources that you share because the specificity in terms of the child's development is certainly reflected in the documents and how you talk about the tools and that sort of thing. So let's start with your K2s,
Sure.
and maybe even this applies to pre-K2s. I might suggest. I've
Yes.
seen very young children, of course, with devices. And so, what's the primary premise for your pre-K2 content? And it's called "Be Safer Online with NetSmarts."
Yes, absolutely. So that particular presentation and set of resources is intended to start to introduce these concepts to the littles, as I like to call them. And so we're talking about netiquette, which of course is online etiquette. We're introducing concepts because of course, and we've got to be honest, with or without COVID, a lot of this youngest generation will continue to interact and learn online. Mm-hmm. So that particular set of resources is intended, again, to introduce those concepts about being kind to one another online and introduce in very basic terms that young children can understand that it's not okay to speak to someone that they do not know online, and it's certainly not okay to divulge personal information. We talk about what personal information means, like my address, my full name, where I go to school, those kinds of things. And we also introduce in very plain terms the concept of identity theft and scams. And I know that may sound a little ludicrous in talking to kids that young, but our youngsters, and I have been victim, thanks to my 5-year-old, they love a good pop-up, right? They're playing a game or reading a book online, and they'll click on that pop-up because in their precious little mind, they really do think they won a present or a dragon or a surprise or whatever it is. So we introduce some of those concepts. We make it fun. We have tons of bright graphics. Those presentations are very short. And we also have videos that coincide to kind of drive home that point and retain their attention. And so that is our K through 2 introduction to NetSmarts and establishing that foundation that we talked about just a few minutes ago to prepare them for some more difficult situations and conversations.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to say too, our schools work very diligently to ensure that the tools that they are providing to our students are safe. That doesn't mean that they're foolproof though, right? So a link or a click, and unfortunately the bad actors are aware of what our young children are using as well.
Yes, and I think we can see that as evidenced in some of the news that was out over the summer with Zoom bombings, right? And we're all capable, intelligent adults, and we have also fallen prey to some of those bad actors. And I'm glad you mentioned bad actors. Those are actually some of the characters featured in our NetSmarts curriculum. Right. We have different mascots and other, so that they grow with these characters and recognize some of those themes and terms, which are also available on our website.
Then you move to your elementary school, and here you sort of say those are around grades 3 to 5. And your series there is called Being a Good Digital Citizen. So can you talk a little bit about how that progresses from the K2 work?
Sure. So we actually start to introduce cyberbullying in that particular curriculum, and we call it by its name. We call it cyberbullying, which is probably the biggest difference between that curriculum and the one for the younger children. Mm-hmm. As educators are fully aware, it is within this age range that they start to absolutely develop their friend circles and their little interests and all of those kinds of things. And so we absolutely feel it's important to start reinforcing the concept of cyberbullying, what it is, what it might look like, and how to help and how to be a good digital citizen to prevent becoming either a victim or a cyberbully. That's essentially the biggest difference between those two presentations. And we do recommend, and I'd like to share that when presenting and providing this information that our educators do, and of course they already know this, but it's important to separate the K through 2 and 3 through 5, because some of the information just may go over the heads of the littles and maybe too juvenile for the olders. But nonetheless, same message, just packaged a little differently to really home in on the audience.
And I love that about your work too, and that it's packaged in an age appropriate way. I've seen, I've seen things for high school students that are clearly written at a much lower level, and they turn right. It's not for me. I know.
Absolutely.
There's a cartoon character, therefore I don't need that information. But definitely with the younger children, that's where they relate to.
Yes.
Now we get into middle school, and from my experience, this is for my own children and their friends. This is typically when they start to get their own devices and that sort of thing, and they're assigned maybe in school, and they have one to take home in a non-COVID environment. And in this one, it's called NetSmart's Online Safety for middle school grades 6 to 8. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing here with needs for children and how you're addressing it?
Sure. So this particular age group, and this is my personal experience as Belinda Swan presenting to different age groups, this one can be quite difficult, right? We have a lot of teen angst or preteen angst in the room, and it can be a little difficult to pierce through that. But by and large, we know they're listening, and we know that they're taking away key concepts, especially if they've already been introduced to this information as a younger child. What differentiates this particular presentation from those before it is we start to introduce those concepts of inappropriate content. We start talking about what that looks like, and we start talking about what that means as far as their personal responsibility with their own bodies and photos and all of those kinds of things, and some of the consequences that could happen if they engage in that kind of behavior. Even 10 years ago, I think by and large for parents and other folks in the community, we didn't want to recognize that kids that young were potentially engaging in that behavior. But, studies continuously show that as technology becomes more pervasive and more easily accessible, the kiddos who are engaging in this behavior are becoming younger and younger. And so at NCMEC, we understand those trends, especially everything we do and produce is data-driven based on the information we receive on our cyber tip line. So we believe it's absolutely important to start having these conversations, these difficult and uncomfortable conversations with this age group.
Absolutely. Then we enter the high school years.
Yes.
and here, from my own experiences, again, with high school children, I see an incredible reliance on their devices. And especially now, I think in COVID, they're longing for those relationships and for any elements of normalcy. And even last night, our governor did a press release last night, and he talked about gatherings and such, and he said, make it virtual as much as you can. And so, I feel like our high school students were doing a lot of that already, but now it's for some the only way they are communicating with friends, with teachers. So what are some important messages for high school students?
Sure. And this is interesting. And when I speak with high school students and educators that teach high school students and parents and families, I like to ask everyone to try to remember themselves at this age group and some of the emotions and all of the different kinds of things that a teenager may be experiencing as you try to form your own identity and your own place in the world, yet you're still considered a child, right? And so we find at this age group that they're especially trying to assert their identity, they're more comfortable in who they are, and they may not have a lot of the same inhibitions that some of the younger children may have. And so this particular set of resources and presentation recognizes that and speaks in a little bit more bolder terms. We talk about sexting, we talk about online enticement, we discuss what those things are and some of the consequences of engaging in both behaviors. With regard to sexting, we specifically talk about what it means when you are not involved and you receive this photo and you decide that you're going to send it anyway, you've just become a perpetrator, right? You are in possession of child sexual abuse material and you are disseminating that material. And again, we are not trying to scare our children, but we want them to look at it in practical terms. This is what this is. You are still a minor, you are still a child. This not only is potentially illegal, every state is, laws are different, but it's also damaging to the person in the photo. It can have long-lasting effects. And we try to make the teenagers understand that, because we understand that we're battling. I think this is important for us all. And I will note, I'm in my 40s, and my formative years were in the 90s when there were no smartphones. And so I too have to check my internal bias and my internal, my projections on these kids these days, right, as it were, about how they're socializing, how they're growing up. So we have to remember that accessing, information about sexuality, expressing themselves sexually, learning about all of these different concepts online is where they're doing it, right? It's how it's simply an extension of that relatively normal behavior that each and every one of us has gone through. So we've got to remember that before placing a ton of judgment and try to empathize with perhaps why the child is engaging in this behavior. And we talk about that in this particular presentation. We focus, and this is key, we focus though on healthy relationships. Right. We emphasize with this age group that someone who cares for you, someone who loves you, would never, ever, ever make you do something that makes you uncomfortable. And that includes asking for inappropriate content from you, or that you share inappropriate content. A real friend would not make you do something that you know is wrong and that you don't want to do. And that is probably what essentially differentiates from the others. We talk in more plain language because we know these kiddos are older. We talk more about consequences. I love the point you made with your children. We absolutely do a deep dive in some real world examples of, kiddos who have posted things online and then lost scholarships or lost opportunities for internships or jobs. We just have a really frank discussion at the high school age because we know that they are already invested in this behavior and are in a lot of ways more advanced than we are as parents and educators. And it is called advanced online safety for that reason.
Thank you. I find myself thinking about the complexities of their worlds.
Yes.
I'm a Gen Xer, so I grew up without, but then, learned to use and
yep.
Yeah. And so, but thinking about, it's not a magazine under the mattress. It's here for the world, and that curiosity and that developmental kind of awareness is there. Just the opportunities to be taken advantage of are tremendous. So you have some great content. And again, the website is missingkids.org, and we'll share that again throughout the podcast as well. And so we've talked about our children from our kindergartners through our high school students. For many teachers, online teaching or blended teaching is very new as well. And I know just with the general adult population, phishing schemes and clickbait and all of these things just seem to have exploded in the last year as well. And so when you think about our educators using digital tools, what are some suggestions that you might have for them in terms of their own safety and keeping their students safe online?
Sure. Well, first, I'd like to commend every single educator that's listening. Thank you so much for being the backbone in this country and for continuing to move us forward and educate our children in ridiculous circumstances, right? Unprecedented circumstances.
Unprecedented.
Absolutely. That is the word for 2020. The thing that comes to mind when I think about what educators could, think about a little differently, or maybe be on the lookout for, as if you don't have enough already, but yeah, is cyberbullying. I'd like to just, share a couple of different things you might be on the lookout for that are also indicators of a variety of other issues, but that may be an indicator that a student is being cyberbullied. as a result of having to do more research online. As you mentioned, districts are doing fantastic jobs in making sure that devices and websites are secure. But we've got to remember that kids are also socializing and researching online as well as part of this virtual learning. So some of the things to look for are certainly if a child is more withdrawn, right? And that's just an indicator overall that something's wrong. We know that. But if they're more withdrawn and less likely perhaps to, that could look like maybe not turning in assignments, not engaging in class. And again, could be an indicator of a lot of different things, but could also be an indicator that they're simply afraid to be online because they're being bullied online. With regard to the actual perpetrator, and of course this is difficult for an educator to kind of weed out, but a lot of times a child who is cyberbullying another will have a ton of different email addresses and different accounts. And this may be something that an educator may be privy to or aware of simply by the nature of trying to contact the child and make sure they're turning in their assignments. They could be logging on at all hours of the day or night. We have to remember that a lot of kids may be accessing a device at strange hours to do their homework, plain and simple. Absolutely. And some, and others may be using it as an excuse to log on and perpetrate some cyberbullying activities. And so we're looking at, decreased or increased activity online at strange hours, that withdrawal. And then for the cyberbully again, and this is something that's easier to note as a parent, but if your child or student is, and of course, I would say this is probably geared more toward our parents and guardians in the audience, but if they have several devices open at the same time and you walk in a room and they're shutting them off, they're turning them off, they're defensive when you ask what they're looking at or what they're doing. I mean, that's a sign that it's time for a conversation anyway, but it could be a sign we've seen of cyberbullying. And if they are laughing a whole bunch while they're online, completing assignments and other things like that, it's time to ask what's so funny, right? Because a bully wants a reaction out of a person and they take some joy out of it. So none of us want to think that our child is capable, but those are some things to look for. From an educator's perspective, again, if that child is withdrawn and not turning in assignments and not participating online, it's time to maybe have a conversation and ask what's going on. It could be that they are being victimized by a cyberbully.
I found too, just from my own personal experience, that children are less likely to share experiences where they've been bullied. It's sort of a saving phase kind of thing. If it's a stranger or something like that, they might, again, from my own experiences, be more apt to share. But if it's somebody in their peer group, not so much.
Right.
So those are some really helpful tips.
Yes, and we also, advocate for, you don't have to be a bystander, right? And again, I'm a mom. I would never want to put my kid in danger or encourage them to potentially be victimized themselves. But what we can talk about with our kids is that, hey, our teachers, our educators have a lot going on right now. If you recognize that someone is picking on someone else on these platforms, or, the teacher's trying to, in Texas, we have blended the teachers monitoring Zoomers and rumors, as my daughter's teacher calls them. And when she turns her back, if someone's being a bully, you can tell your trusted adult, is what we like to tell our kids, and then we can work together to report it to the cyber tip line or report it to your teacher anonymously. So there are different ways to empower our kids to help our educators to combat this problem.
Right. And maybe that's a good strategy too for teachers to have kind of a pipeline or a safe way to share that information to protect the reporter's identity, if you will.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a great idea.
Great. Thank you. So you talked about your cyber tip line. If I'm, as an adult, if I am seeing something that needs to be reported, first of all, what are some things that I would report, for example, and how would I do that? And can you talk about anonymity and requirements and that sort of thing?
Sure, great question. Thank you. As I noted earlier, it is the absolute nerve center of our organization. It is our pulse on trends regarding the types of crimes that are happening, the types of situations our children are finding themselves in online. Anyone can report to the cyber tip line, and we encourage you to report anyone who sends a child photos or videos containing obscene content, of course, anyone who asks a child to send sexual images, anyone speaking to a child in a sexual manner. So this may be those spot checks we encourage our trusted adults to do, and when they're gaming, if you hear some sexual content or anything that is inappropriate or sexual in nature with a minor, go ahead and try to find that gamer's ID, and you can report that to the cyber tip line. Mm-hmm. Anyone who asks your child or a child in your life to meet in person that they only know online, definitely report that to the cyber tip line. As we mentioned with cyberbullying, you can be an active bystander in any one of these situations and file a report or call us. We're here 24 hours a day, every day of the year, and we have folks on standby that speak a variety of languages as well, including Spanish, of course. So we are, and if for some reason there's a language that we don't have someone on call with, we'll find someone. So there are no barriers and no reasons not to call. If for some reason there's an issue that we don't necessarily address, which is very rare, we'll absolutely direct you with the right resources. So when in doubt, just shoot us an email. You can call us at 1-800-THE-LOST.
1-800-THE-LOST.
Mm-hmm.
And those can be anonymous as well?
Absolutely, yes. In addition to all of our online resources for families and such, we also have launched our own learning management system called NCMEC Connect, and we encourage any and everyone, especially educators, to take a look. You can create a profile for free, and then you will have unlimited access to all of our training sessions for free. Again, you will never pay for any one of our resources on a variety of topics, including child sexual trafficking, how to teach online safety, just so many incredible opportunities geared toward educators. And so we do encourage you. Again, that's NCMEC Connect, and you can find that on our website as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. Again, the website with these incredible resources is missingkids.org. You'll see resources for parents, for educators, just some really, really amazing things. Everything from lesson plans to videos. Your team has done a tremendous work in terms of supporting our schools and our children. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Another great conversation with Dr. Valerie Schmitz and Belinda Swan. So thankful to have her on our podcast. All of her work and the National Center's work is so important.
Yeah, it was great to have her, and I hope we'll be able to have a conversation again with her in the near future. To learn more about the work Belinda and NCMEC are doing, visit missingkids.org. You can find all the links and resources mentioned in this conversation in the podcast description.
Thanks again for joining the second episode of CESA 2's Building Educator Capacity podcast. We hope to see you on episode 3, where we discuss the importance of positivity and its impact on our self-care. Thanks for listening.